The agenda is set. Hello, everyone. I'm Brent Goff in Berlin. Killing in kindergarten, a massacre in an American school. Is this the new norm, or has a red line finally been crossed? That and more today. It's time to talk. In Connecticut, carnage in the classroom. In minutes, one man wiped out 20 small children with guns built for the battlefield. Is this what it takes to bring gun control to the U.S.? Stop them at the border. Europe now has 400,000 police and guards on duty to stop illegal immigrants. First step is detention. Thousands risk their lives every year to reach Europe. They rarely receive a greeting with open arms. Fortress Europe, why some say the walls must come down. And why bother talking about anything anymore? In case you didn't know, the world as we know it is about to end. The ancient Mayan calendar. One interpretation claims that this week the lights will go out forever on humankind, an approaching apocalypse. Well, today we're going to take a chill pill and tell you why you don't need to fear or fight the future. Well, I've invited three people today to talk, argue, and pry apart these headlines. My first guest says that the ancient Mayans, if they were with us now, especially this week, they would probably be scratching their heads in disbelief and maybe even laughing at us. I'm happy to welcome today Professor Raul Rojas. He is our expert on the Mayans and their math. Professor, so do we have it all wrong? Is the world not going to end on December 21st?
At least not this year.
At least not this year. All right, so there's another chance that everything will happen next year. We're going to talk about all the hype around this date in just a moment. My second guest came to Europe as a refugee from Nigeria, and he says Europe should open its borders, not make them tighter. I'm happy to welcome to the show Rex Olsa. He is with the Voice Refugee Forum. And as I said, Rex, you were a refugee yourself from Nigeria. Why do you think Europe should open the gates? Doesn't it have a responsibility to control who comes in, just as any country would do?
It's a responsibility that Europe has to take. So it's just a responsibility. It's not an issue of should open, it's an issue of must open, because that's the only option.
Okay, the only option. We're going to talk about that option in just a second. And my next guest is here to help us make sense of where America's gun culture could be headed in the wake of the Newtown shooting. I'm happy to welcome to the show Charles King Mallory. He is director of the Aspen Institute, Germany. Aspen Institute, a conservative leadership think tank. Charles, President Obama now calling for real reform. We've got at least two members of Congress, Republicans, who say they've changed their mind. They now support gun control. Has that red line been crossed in the U.S.?
I think the deaths are absolutely tragic, but what people are losing sight of in the picture is where these deaths fit in the overall picture of deaths that are caused by gun violence.
All right, the numbers we're going to talk about in just a second. It's a very good point. I've got some numbers for you here. The past 5 years have been some of the bloodiest in U.S. history. There have been 12 mass shootings in the U.S. on the level of Newtown. Now, half of those have occurred since 2007. In that same time, U.S. states have passed 99 laws loosening control on guns. Support for stricter gun laws has gotten weaker, not stronger, despite all the killings. So this week, as the youngest victims of the school shooting in Connecticut are laid to rest, the world wonders again, can another tragedy change America's gun-loving culture?
It was a crime that sent shockwaves through the United States. Last week, a gunman forced his way into an elementary school in Newtown, Connecticut, and began shooting. 20 children were gunned down, the youngest just 5 years old. The gunman also shot dead 6 staff at the school and killed his own mother beforehand. At the White House and around the country, flags are flying at half-mast. It's the fourth time that President Barack Obama has faced the aftermath of a shooting spree. He said that this time, something has to change.
We can't tolerate this anymore. These tragedies must end.
That's a call now echoed by many Americans. But just as many are still unwilling to give up their guns.
Charles, isn't that part of the problem here? Whenever we talk about gun control in America, someone always comes back and says we have to give up our guns. It's always black and white when we talk about guns in America.
Well, we have the Second Amendment to the Constitution, which contributes to that. I think
but the Second Amendment doesn't mean that all of a sudden people have to give up the guns.
Well, I think there's lots one can do beyond just simply banning weapons. For instance, a number of these guns were taken from the perpetrator's mother's house and used against these poor, defenseless children. One thing you could consider doing is making people liable for what happens with their guns. And I actually did a hunting license here in Germany. I have to keep my guns locked up, and if I don't do that, I am fully liable. So if people had to pay a couple of $1 million in damages for someone who took their guns and used them to commit such a horrible crime, it might change the picture considerably without banning guns.
Okay, I mean, that's one argument, making people liable for what's done with what they own. But let's get back to a much more fundamental issue here, and that is when the discussion in America reaches a level that it is right now about taking these semi-automatic, these battlefield weapons out of the hands of private people. People immediately say you're violating the Second Amendment. I mean, where's the common sense here? I mean, the Second Amendment says the Americans have a right to maintain a militia and a right to bear arms. But does that mean that I have the right to live in Connecticut and have an AK-47 in my closet?
Well, what they also says in the Second Amendment is that they are necessary for a free government. And the Founding Fathers clearly envisaged the right to bear arms as a check on tendencies towards a dictatorial government in our country.
But see, it's the point, isn't it? As a check on the federal government.
Yeah.
Is that what was meant, Charles, or is it a check on the King of England? That's what the Founding Fathers were afraid of, right?
Well, it's certainly not specified that way in the Second Amendment.
But that was the thinking behind it, wasn't it?
Well, I mean, I think that a lot of people who do not want to see the right to bear arms limited in any way believe that in addition to that, or as an extension of that thought, having an armed population is a guarantee against oppressive government, whether foreign or domestic. And that is the key problem that you're going to have to face if you want to do something to control gun violence. Now,
but doesn't that fly in the face of checks and balances, for example? I mean, the Constitution guarantees three parts of the government. You have the judiciary, you have the executive, and then you have Congress. They're there to check each other to make sure that the balance of power is maintained. Aren't you saying if everyone has his or her own little militia at home, aren't you saying we need that because we don't actually trust the Constitution? There's this built-in level of huge mistrust. How can a society function when everybody thinks the other guy is out to get him?
I think the Founding Fathers had a great mistrust in concentration of power in any sort. And what we've seen is a huge centralization and federalization of power in the United States of the last 100 years. And it's not an accident that Thomas Jefferson, one of his most famous quotes, is that the tree of liberty needs to be fertilized with the blood of tyrants from time to time. There was a deliberate view in the founding of the Republic that political systems have a tendency towards tyranny, and that there need to be tools available beyond the political structure of three branches of government to allow people to take things into their own hands from time to time if they need to.
What would you say then to the parents of the children who are being buried this week?
My deepest condolences, and it's a tragedy. It is absolutely horrible what happened. I cannot imagine the loss they're going through. But as if you're talking about policy, one has to look at what percentage of total deaths related to gun violence these horrible shootings represent. And the fact of the matter is, it's a fraction of a percent. And the people who are really to blame here are the media, because they are making a big deal out of this for commercial reasons.
Oh, come on.
And they are
you
also
can't
making,
blame the media. You can't say the media told this man to go into a school and kill children.
The media are contributing to the problem by making a huge ballyhoo out of these incidents when they happen. As a result,
but it is a big event. It is and you can't blame the media too for copycat crimes. I mean, it is a big event. It is a newsworthy event. But the point is, this man had access to weapons that only a soldier should have access to. And the question is, will society in America be willing to pass legislation that will make it impossible for people to get their hands on those types of weapons? Isn't that a common sense approach?
That's not what our Constitution says about only soldiers having access to these kinds of weapons.
Yeah, but the Constitution doesn't have to list out everything. I'm talking about common sense, Charles.
It's a question of what is called the availability bias. Because of the way media cover things in the United States, people think that murder is more frequent than suicide. It's what you choose to cover and how you choose to cover it. And what's really going on here is that we've just had a liberal president reelected, and a media elite in the United States, which can be statistically shown to have a liberal bias, has decided it's going to open this issue and has decided to use this to open this issue. The big issue is gun-related violence of the non-school massacre type. And my argument would be the way to tackle this is to make people liable.
Well, making people liable is certainly one aspect. I will just throw this out, and I'd like to pull in the other gentleman here today. Last week, when this massacre occurred in Connecticut, there was also a school attack in China, where I think more than 20 children were injured there. A man walked into a school and also attacked children, but he had a knife. And many children were injured, but no one died because it's practically impossible for someone in China to get access to a handgun. I mean, the number is there, and shouldn't America learn from that? Let me ask you two. I mean, is it possible when you're outside the United States looking at that to understand why Americans love their guns so much? What do they say in Nigeria when they look at what's happening in the United States?
Actually, I wouldn't have much to say about that, but I think it's just like an institutionalized culture that everybody has the right to hold guns in the United States.
And you don't think there's any way to bring common sense into the discussion?
Actually, not.
No? Professor, what do you say? I mean,
well, I think that this amendment in the Constitution is a historical issue, and constitutions change over time. So I think that shouldn't be a taboo, that if something is not working, you cannot change it. And I can even relate this with the situation in Mexico. In Mexico, we have a war. We have the so-called drugs war, and most of the weapons come from the U.S. So in Mexico, we actually have gun control. So it's very difficult to get a gun in Mexico, but it's very easy to get that gun in the U.S. And the guns are just brought through the border, which is very transparent for weapons going from the U.S. to Mexico, and this is feeding also the war there.
Yeah, and Charles, what about this point? I mean, the professor has a good point. The Constitution is interpreted. The Constitution breathes. It changes with time. Even the most conservative justices on the Supreme Court say that they're in the business of interpreting the document. Why can't we say that the way we have read the Second Amendment the past 30, 40 years needs to be changed?
Because a majority of Americans are against that. And getting to your point about China, let me ask you a rhetorical question in return. Do you think Tiananmen Square would have happened if the Chinese population had a right to bear arms?
Yeah, but we're not talking about revolution in the United States, though, Charles.
But that is the ultimate guarantee.
We're talking about protecting people from guns that should not be in civil society. I mean, my point is, where is the common sense here in the discussion? We're not saying you can't have a handgun. we're saying you can't have access to battlefield weapons. That just sounds like common sense?
Well, I mean, in many ways, that has already been that issue has already been decided. I mean, automatic weapons have been banned, but what you find is that people find ways of working around it. You can buy a kit to turn a semi-automatic weapon into an automatic weapon. What it boils down to, for me, I understand that government and media elites supporting them want to slowly chip away at the ability of the people to overthrow the government if they don't like what they're doing. That I completely understand. But in the final analysis...
I don't think that people in the media are going to agree with you on that, Charles. I don't think that's what anyone in the business
this is what
planning.
People who, when people who are for gun control see these attempts coming from the media and from government to limit this right to bear arms, a lot of people think that this is essentially designed to remove the last check and balance that is available to oppressive government. Now, can things be done to prevent the recurrence of this kind of tragedy? Yes, absolutely. One could...
And I'll give you an example before we have to move on. In Australia, in the 1990s, they had a similar incident there, and they banned all semi-automatic weapons under a government at the time. They banned it. Plus, they had a gun buyback program that was successful. Since that event, I think it was 1996, correct me if I'm wrong, there has not been one mass shooting in Australia. Couldn't the United States do that? People still have the right to buy a pistol. They just don't have the right to buy semi-automatic weapons. Couldn't that be a solution?
I mean, I don't know if you go hunting, but, you know, to have an automatically reloading shotgun is a useful thing to have when you're hunting duck. So I don't think I really agree with that.
Well, I mean, it's a good point, but I think, you know, maybe we need to talk more about the welfare of children and the welfare of hunters and ducks in the United States. But I think we'll be talking about this for a long time to come, and we need to move on. Another issue here in Europe, they are willing to die just for the chance to make it to where we are right now. We have reported time and time again this year on the people from Northern Africa crossing the Mediterranean, hoping to reach the shores of Europe. Many times they drown. More often they end up in detention centers, such as the one on the Italian island of Lampedusa. The European Union spends millions of euros every year to keep out illegal immigrants. But critics say this fortress Europe is too expensive to maintain, and they argue it goes against the identity of Europe as a beacon of human rights.
They fear torture, imprisonment, and even death. Across the world, millions of refugees are on the move, seeking a safe haven, but the welcome mat is rarely laid out for them. Thousands make their way to Europe. The new arrivals are often housed in crowded camps during the long wait for asylum. Human rights groups say the conditions there are not much better than those many refugees have fled. Some Europeans say the EU shouldn't be taking in large numbers of refugees when many member states are struggling with severe austerity measures and spiralling unemployment. So, does charity begin at home? Or should Europe be doing more to protect refugees from persecution, poverty, and misery?
Rex, you say the European Union should open the gates, that it should allow more immigrants, more refugees to come in. Why?
To close the borders in itself shows that Europe has something to hide. And so you could imagine, when you close the doors, it means there's something hidden. This is on one hand. And the second thing is the responsibilities of the migration from the refugee countries. Europe has a responsibility to this also.
Let me ask you this idea of hiding something. You're in Europe now. You know what it looks like from inside. Yeah. What is Europe hiding?
What I am sorry?
What is Europe trying to hide?
Yeah, what it is the propaganda goes around to say, yes, Europe is a land of freedom or whatever, and that even here everything is okay. It's like you pick gold on the street. This is the propaganda that goes into the refugee countries. And the government will not even want to present exactly how Europe is to the so-called refugee countries.
So do you regret coming to Europe?
Yeah, I wouldn't say regrets, but I think I'm privileged to be here to know that Europe is not what it's thought of, or the propaganda that they preach over.
Who do you think is responsible for this propaganda that you're talking about?
It's just the politics of the capitalist system. It's the whole imperialist structure.
I mean, but do you think the governments of the European Union, do you think that they are putting out this propaganda that manna is falling from the sky in Europe and that everything is perfect here?
Yeah, I think it's also just to say, yes, we are human. It's also the issue to say that we are human, we are special in the world, and so this is how it is.
What about the economic situation right now in Europe? You're here now. You see, especially in Southern Europe, you see that with the financial crisis, there's high unemployment. Can you understand, being here in Europe now, why there are political forces, particularly in Spain, Italy, Greece, who say now is not the time to allow more immigrants into the European Union?
But we should think about it also. The financial crisis in Europe is also having a very strong effect on the refugee countries, because where will the survival come? It comes also from the refugee countries. If Europe continues to be on the top lead of selling weapons and supporting dictatorship rules in the different countries where there are conflicts for just their interest, then there's no way you can stop the movement of people for security or a better life.
So you're saying Europe is responsible for what's happening in Africa?
Yeah, and in the refugee countries in general.
Yeah, and what about the Africans themselves? Do they have responsibility for what's happening in their home countries?
Yeah, I think it's the ideology. It has to be traced back to the colonial injustice as we see it. So this is the after effect of the colonial rules, and so.
Okay, so the colonial powers that had colonies in Europe. A lot of people would share that with you, but there are also people who would say that these are things that happened a generation or 2 generations ago. You can't victimize an entire population. You have to take responsibility for your welfare now, as well as for your children. And if that's the case, then how can you blame the Europeans for how bad things are in Nigeria, for example?
So what are the changes that has existed in the last 20 years or whatever? There's no change. What we even see is just beautified repression. We are still under colonial rules. It's just an ideology.
Let me bring in another gentleman here. Charles, what do you say about this? Is Europe oppressing European countries and at the same time refusing to let refugees in who should be able to come in?
Well, I think there's always a legitimate reason for admitting refugees for humanitarian grounds, political repression, things like that. Where the issue becomes a bit more difficult is when you have refugee streams that are economically motivated. And I agree with Rex in one respect, which is that I think that we need to look ourselves in the mirror and say, how much are we creating this pathology ourselves? We like to think of it externally as being a problem generated in these African countries, and please don't talk to me about colonialism that happened 50 years ago. You've had plenty of time to deal with your problems yourself. But if you close your markets to countries which are largely agricultural, should you be surprised that people who can't earn a living then start moving? And so my answer would be...
So, for example, the French, with the common agricultural policy here in the EU, we keep French farmers in business.
Well, and then they bellyache a lot about 5 million Muslim refugees and streams of refugees they're facing on their southern border. But the fact of the matter is they're enabling this, if not even exacerbating it, by erecting barriers to agricultural imports. A country like Morocco, where there are a lot of immigrants to France, 50% agricultural economy. If they had a way of earning money from their cash crop, maybe they stay home.
What do you say, Professor? Does Europe need to work on fixing the problem?
Yeah, I think there are several problems in Europe. One is that the different countries in the European Union should share the burden of refugees, because there is a humanitarian crisis in some of these countries, and when this happens, you can expect that people are going to arrive, and there should be a way within the European Union to manage that. And the other thing is that Europe needs something like the European dream. In the US, there is this idea of the American dream that people can arrive, can be integrated, and can do it by themselves. In Europe, we still need that, even for Europeans themselves, because you don't see a lot of movement within the European Union between countries.
Yeah.
We need that European dream.
Rex, what about this idea? Did you think there was this European dream when you came here? This idea of a better life, freedom?
Yeah, I was working and I was earning good when I was in Nigeria. I only came in here because I was persecuted. And so this dream of Europe being paradise was not really because I was living on an average level. And so, but just being here for security, it turned out to see the actual side of Europe, that Europe is not what is even seen from far.
How would you describe your experience when you arrived in Europe?